Hello, just some bits for my collection.
Well, everyone, we hear so many exciting and lurid stories about Senator Lydia Thorpe over these past few months, but in far too rarely do they involve Lydia's actual input, it seems. But not today, and that's one of the many reasons why I'm so pumped to have you on as a guest. Lydia Thorpe, hello and welcome, mate.
Hello, Tom. Brother Tom, thank you very much for agreeing to have a conversation about truth. And yes, you only ever hear one side. So thanks for the opportunity.
Oh,
And
no.
I will say that we're all on stolen land, and it's been a long, hard fight for our old people over the last 200 years. And I just want to acknowledge those warriors of the frontier wars and generations of survivors.
Thank you, and thanks so much for coming on. Yeah, I really appreciate it. And Lydia, yeah, as I say, so often I see discussions happening, particularly over the course of 2023, in the media and political space about you. For months now, but rarely do they seek your input. They might reference a statement that you have released, if that. And I feel as a layperson onlooker that lately it seems like most of the Australian political media establishment is hell-bent on telling stories about how rude and badly behaved you are. Is that sort of how you've experienced these past several months?
Absolutely. I've had to endure all kinds of lies and misinformation and hear about it the next day and wonder what I'm waking up to each day and what the next attack will be. And it's not something that is new to me.
Hmm.
Having call out so much injustice in all my life and seeing my grandmothers and mother go through this also in terms of just fighting for basic justice. There are always people that are threatened by that, and at the end of the day, it's easier to demonize somebody like me and look for any mistake or um, inflate something that really is nothing.
Yeah.
And that's what I've had to endure.
Yeah, because as you've just pointed out, the Thorpe family is a multi-generational activist fighting family, and I guess later on I'd like to maybe mention or address that kind of that separation or that communication breakdown between activist or black sovereignty politics and kind of parliamentary politics, which sometimes I feel was part of the communication breakdown here. But
well, Aboriginal activists are planning on using Invasion Day protests to demand freedom for Palestine and call on the Albanese government to cut all ties with Israel. Independent Senator Lydia Thorpe, of course, is leading the charge on this. She told The Australian today, quote, "Palestinians know what the trauma of invasion, of dispossession, state violence and occupation is like, just as First Peoples in this country do. We share a reality of ongoing genocide and are both yet to experience liberation and the acknowledgement of our sovereignty. Our struggle under settler colonialism is one struggle. Together we're fighting for our humanity, for freedom, for land back, and for lasting peace." Oh.
Now, there's some conclusions we can draw from this. The first conclusion I think we can draw is that racism is not unchanging. And if it means it's not unchanging, then it's not innate. What we're dealing with here is not a set of values that people are born with, hardwired into their psychology, and that really are inevitable, the results of which are inevitable. Because if that was the case, racism wouldn't have to change over time. It wouldn't have to change to respond to different circumstances and adapt. It would mean a static set of ideas. Instead, what we have is a movable set of ideas that reflects the situation. But it also then raises another question. So one of the dangers of some of the language associated with decolonisation is that it can suggest that this is really a binary divide. And the binary divide is between those who are colonised and those who are colonisers. And that means if you live in the empire, in the heart of empire, like you live in Britain, then you are part of the colonisers. And if you live in the world that was colonised, then you are the colonised. Now, the obvious problems with this. Now, think about there's 2 points I would make about this. Look, not everyone who suffered the indignities of colonialism later became a friend of anti-colonialism and anti-racism. And that's evident still today. You think that Rwanda was a German colony, was a Belgian colony until independence, and today it's part of the British Commonwealth, and its neoliberal President Paul Kagame recently signed the deal with the British government that allows the offshoring of our asylum seekers in Rwandan camps. Now, Kagame is an enemy of anti-racists, and he and all the other capitalist African and Asian leaders, he's not simply a puppet of colonialism. We can't simply say all he's doing is doing colonialism's business. And the reason we can say that is that we can understand him better as a junior imperialist power. The Rwandan ruling class have their own class interests that they want to pursue. Look at the role, and if you want to understand this, look at the role of Rwanda that it's playing in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo, where they are backing the rebels who are attacking that government. Now, the West says that it's appalled by this. The US and the EU have both at different times levelled sanctions against the Rwandan regime for doing this, and yet the Rwandan regime does it anyway. Why? Because it's in the interests of the Rwandan ruling class to pursue its own agenda. So simply to say that these African and Asian leaders are puppets of US imperialism or puppets of colonialism, that isn't a good enough explanation for me, because it doesn't explain how they act, sometimes in opposition and sometimes against the wishes of the main imperial powers. And secondly, there's a big problem, I think, with saying that everyone who lives in empire, who lives in countries that were the centres of empire, is complicit in the strategy of empire itself. I think there has been a strategy of a thread of anti-racism in the British working class that can be traced all the way back to slavery. In this area, like literally here where we're sat, it was known in the 18th century that if you were a runaway slave, a black slave with a white master in the centre of town, if you could make it here to the East End of London, there was no way your master would come to the East End to try and have you arrested and taken back. Why? Because the mob would protect you. And what they meant by the mob was that the disparate poor who lived here primarily here would not allow masters to reclaim slaves from this area. And you can carry on tracing this to think about Sheffield, 1794, a huge rally against slavery, where they passed a resolution. This is mostly artisans, i.e. people before the working class, who said, wishing to be rid of the weight of oppression under which we groan, we are induced to compassionate those who groan also. We have pledged ourselves to avenge peaceably the ages of wrongs done to our Negro brethren. The meeting is so large that the city of Sheffield bans public meetings for several years afterwards. Or think about the American Civil War, 1860s, where the Lancashire cotton workers supported the North in the Civil War, despite the fact that the North was blockading the ports in the South that sent cotton to the Lancashire mills. And they stood for years on the side of the North. Why? Because of their opposition to slavery. Now, Lincoln, who goes on to become the first president, one of the first presidents of the United States, he says, the Lancashire cotton workers were an instance of sublime Christian heroism which has not been surpassed in any age or any country. Now, that's a nice sentiment. I'm sure I agree with it. But there's more to it than that, isn't there? It's not just that the people in Lancashire had good morals. What they understood was that the same boss that were sweating them, that allowed children to work in the factories for 18 hours a day, 6.5 days a week, allowed them to work in the mines, is the same boss that owns the plantation. It's the same boss that is shipping the slaves. In other words, the same class enemy that you faced is the one that we are facing on the other side, the other side of the world. And what that says to me is that what we learn from this trajectory is that we are not just fighting relics of empire. We are not fighting the old symbols of the old regime. We are fighting contemporary racism, not just because it exists as a set of ideas, but because racism is central to capitalism. It was central back at the time of slavery. It was central at the time of colonialism. It remains central today to the ruling class. The necessity to divide all of us between black and white and brown, to pitch each other as enemies in order for that minority to carry on ruling. And so for that struggle to win, decolonisation has to be an opposition to capitalism. That's it.
That's all. See you later. Bye.